I used to measure life in small routines, warming bottles, counting diapers, tracing the soothing circles on Lily's back until her breathing slowed. I wanted nothing grand, only a chance to offer my daughter a steadier world than the one I'd grown up in. David and I had married with calloused hands and hopeful hearts, certain that love plus effort would equal a future. He worked late shifts at a car parts factory in Columbus, and I stretched coupons into dinners and rent, telling myself the tiredness was proof we were building something. Then his smile began to fade at the edges. His phone lit the room more than his eyes did. When I asked if we were all right, he said yes, but the word felt like a door closing quietly in the dark. The night I found the message, "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Don't let her suspect." The floor tilted. He did not lie or apologize. He skimmed past our history and straight to the exit kissed Lily's forehead as if she were a stranger's child he wished well, and left me with a crib Elise and a silence that scraped the paint off the walls. Days blurred into a stubborn rhythm of counting coins and cutting corners. I took a part-time cashier job and learned how to live on coffee and resolve. Every time the landlord taped a new notice to the door, I pressed my palm to Lily's back and whispered that I would figure it out. When the math finally refused to bend, I dialed my parents with a voice that tasted like rust. My mother allowed us to come with the caution of a loan officer, granting a last extension. My father watched television while I carried in our bags, mentioned he needed his sleep, and turned the volume up. The room that used to be mine had been swallowed by boxes and dust. I carved a small island out of the mess and called it a home. I cooked dinners, cleaned floors, and slid cash from my diner tips across the table like a toll. My mother kept a ledger in her mind. My father measured Lily's cries as if they were debts. When my brother Mark and his wife Claire visited with their children, the house changed temperature. Meals appeared, laughter loosened, stories multiplied. Lily reached toward them and received air. I told myself to be grateful for the roof anyway, to keep the peace and keep my head down, to outwork their disappointment until it softened. It didn't. When Lily spiked a fever, my mother told me to learn responsibility. When I apologized for the late-night cries, my father asked me to control my child. The night I overheard them say they would give me 2 weeks, and then I had to go, the bottle slipped from my hands and rattled across the kitchen linoleum. I packed in the dark so Lily would think we were playing a new game. We found a room in a tired boarding house at the edge of Dayton, a place that smelled of damp wool and served as proof that a lock is sometimes luxury. I stacked coins on the landlord's palm and promised quiet. I kept my job at the diner and tried to smuggle love and routine into the breaks between orders, tucking Lily into a corner with crackers and a blanket, singing to her under my breath. The day her cries carried over the clatter of plates, the manager pointed me to the door and said it wasn't a daycare. I walked out with my final check burning like a small shame in my pocket. I sold my phone, then my wedding ring, then the assumption that I could make it to the end of the month. The landlord knocked with a flat voice, and by afternoon, our things were wet on the sidewalk. I made one last call. My mother said good luck. My father said I would figure it out. Mark's weekend visit mattered more than our hunger. I tucked Lily beneath my jacket and walked into a rain that felt personal. I learned the shape of the city by its doorways and its refusals. Under a highway bridge, a man named Joe gave us a tarp without questions, and a woman named Maria smiled the kind of smile that keeps you from slipping fully into despair. I folded the tarp around us, counted Lily's breaths, and did the math of hours until morning. Fear is loud in the dark. I prayed to whom I couldn't say, because mothers do when the choice is thin to a single thread held between strained fingers. The storm that night was relentless drumbeats on concrete wind that turned cold into a blade. Lily trembled against me, hot with fever and small as a wish. I told her stories in a steady voice about warm rooms and soft blankets and windows that looked out on gardens. I said, "We are going to get there," as if words could push the horizon closer. Then the rain changed its rhythm, and footsteps approached through the dim. He did not belong to the bridge. He carried a black umbrella and wore a suit too careful for weather like this. He stopped a few feet away and lowered the umbrella so I could see his eyes, blue like winter sky and impossibly familiar. He said my name with a certainty that made the bridge feel like a stage set built around us. "Sarah, I finally found you." I wanted to run, yet there I was rooted by the exhaustion of months and the thin hope that sometimes looks like danger. "Who are you?" I managed, and my voice didn't sound like mine. He knelt to my level and glanced at Lily with tenderness so unpracticed it felt true. He said, "My name is Richard Whitmore. I'm your grandfather." The words crashed through me and settled somewhere I had sealed off long ago. I saw my father's eyes in his only gentler, as if mercy had been added to the bloodline and skipped a generation. He told me he had been searching, that betrayal had severed him from his family, that he had no intention of letting history repeat itself with me and my child. The wind tore the tarp free, and Lily cried as if to cast a vote. I looked from her to him and felt the thin thread of survival strain. I said I would not forgive lies. He said I wouldn't have to. I gathered our bag, gathered my courage, and stepped toward the unknown, led by a stranger's umbrella and a last trembling piece of faith. The car, waiting by the curb, looked like something out of another world, its headlights cutting through rain and exhaustion. The driver in uniform opened the door, and I slid inside with Lily pressed to me. For the first time in months, warmth cocooned us air vents, humming gently as leather seats embraced the ache out of my bones. An infant car seat was already strapped in, waiting as if it had been meant for her. I buckled her in with trembling fingers. She blinked up at me wide-eyed but calm, her cries fading into a soft sigh. The rhythm of the tires against wet pavement sounded like a lullaby. I let my head fall back and breathed in safety as if I'd forgotten what it felt like. Hours later, dawn bled over the horizon as we rolled past palm trees swaying in warm Florida air. My breath caught when the gates of a sprawling estate swung open. Cream walls rose against the sky, terracotta tiles shone under the first light, and gardens stretched wide enough to hold 100 forgotten dreams. I stepped out with Lily on my hip, staring at fountains that glittered like captured rain. Richard placed a steady hand on my shoulder. "This is your home now?" he said softly, and though disbelief pressed hard against my ribs, I let him lead me through tall doors into polished warmth. The scent of fresh flowers wrapped around us. Chandeliers scattered light like hope across marble floors. Staff members greeted us with kindness, their eyes soft, their smiles unforced. I didn't know what to do with that kind of welcome. Upstairs, a guest room waited with a crib already prepared, filled with blankets and toys still bearing their tags. I laid Lily down, and for the first time since her birth, she smiled in her sleep. My knees nearly gave out from the release of months of fear. Tears slipped soundlessly, but Richard only rested a hand on the doorframe and whispered, "You're safe now." Later that morning, a doctor arrived with polished professionalism and gentle words. Lily had only a cold nothing, a warm bed, and good care wouldn't heal. When he turned to me, his diagnosis was sharper. Exhaustion, malnourishment, stress ground deep into bone. He told me to rest as if it were medicine, and I realized I hadn't allowed myself rest in more than a year. Meals followed warm soup bread that filled the room with the scent of life fruit so fresh it startled me. At first, I ate in cautious bites, afraid the dream would collapse if I accepted too much. But slowly, I let the food remind me what strength felt like. Lily's cheeks pinked again, her small body relaxing into comfort, her laughter starting to return. The house itself seemed to breathe differently, with her giggles echoing down its halls. I watched her play on a rug that cost more than I had made in months, and I thought of nights under bridges, her tiny fists clenched against cold air. Gratitude and grief tangled in me until I could hardly tell one from the other. Richard didn't flood me with questions or commands. He invited me instead every morning to sit with him on the balcony over coffee. The first time I told him about David's betrayal, my parents' rejection, and the dark days of hunger, his eyes misted, but he stayed silent until I finished. Then he said, "You have carried storms no one should face alone. From now on, you won't." He offered me more than shelter. He asked me to join his company. I laughed bitterly, at first thinking of how I had been scolded for bringing my baby into a diner shift, how I had measured worth in tips and coins. "I don't belong in glass buildings," I told him, but he shook his head. "People don't buy homes for walls or roofs. They buy them for trust, for safety. Who understands that better than you?" I agreed hesitantly, and on my first day at Whitmore Properties, I wore the navy suit Richard had bought me. The lobby gleamed too bright, the conversations around me too confident, and I felt like an imposter walking through marble. Yet Richard introduced me as a trainee, not his granddaughter. No favoritism, no shortcuts. At first I stumbled. Phone calls tangled, my tongue terms blurred, and clients looked past me. More than once I went home ready to quit, but at night, Lily's steady breathing reminded me why I couldn't. Slowly, kindness found me in the form of a colleague named Emily. She taught me to listen instead of sell, to see houses not as inventory, but as promises. "Be genuine," she told me. "You know what safe feels like because you've lost it." I let those words root in me. I stopped trying to sound polished and started telling the truth. Families responded. Trust grew. My voice steadied. Months turned into years. I signed contracts, negotiated deals, and gained a quiet reputation for honesty. By the time Lily turned 4, I wasn't surviving anymore. I was thriving. The board saw it, my colleagues respected it, and Richard stood with pride shining in his eyes when I was named CEO. News outlets called it a miracle, a story of rags to resilience. Interviews painted me as inspiration, but behind every calm smile on screen was the memory of nights under bridges and the vow I had whispered into Lily's hair that I would never let her grow up invisible. Each deal I signed, each policy I pushed, was part of that vow. For a while, I believed the past had finally released me. I didn't yet know it was waiting just outside the polished doors of my new life, ready to knock. The call came from Emily, her voice tight with something more than routine. "Sarah, there are 2 people in the lobby asking for you. They say they're your parents." My chest constricted, the air in my office suddenly heavy. I hadn't heard their voices in years, not since the night they told me Lily and I had no place in their home. Memories surfaced uninvited, my father's cold eyes, as he said, "I had 2 weeks my mother's flat, good luck," when she closed the door on us. I told Emily I'd come down. If nothing else, I needed to face them on my terms this time. The lobby gleamed with glass and steel light pouring in through tall windows. And there they stood, my mother Carol in a faded wool coat, her eyes darting around as if tallying the wealth in sight. My father Richard's son in a suit that hadn't seen care in years, his smile awkward, his posture unsure. "Sarah, honey," my mother said, her voice syrupy rehearsed. "We saw you on TV. You've done so well. We're so proud." The word proud hit me like a mockery. My father stepped forward, trying to look confident. "We should reconnect. Families should stick together, right? We could help you manage all this success." The word family curled bitter in my stomach. I thought of Lily's tiny body trembling under a tarp while they set fresh sheets for Mark's children. I thought of the phone call they ended with a dial tone. "Help," I said quietly, but the sharpness in my voice cut the air. "Like when you threw us out, when I begged you to let Lily stay warm, and you told me you needed space for Mark's kids." My mother's smile wavered. "Those were hard times, Sarah. You can't hold it against us forever." My father tried to mask his discomfort. "We're here now. Isn't that what matters?" Before I could answer, footsteps echoed through the lobby. Richard entered sharp in his tailored suit, his presence commanding enough to silence the entire floor. Employees paused, whispers stirring. My parents froze as if they'd seen a ghost. My father's face drained of color. "Dad, you're alive." His voice cracked on the word. Richard's gaze was cold as marble. "Alive, yes. Watching always. I saw what you did to Sarah, to Lily. The same cruelty you once showed me." Murmurs rippled among the staff as Richard's words carried. "You stole from me, Kenneth. You abandoned your mother until she died with a broken heart. And then you abandoned your own daughter, leaving her on the street with her child. And now you stand here hoping to share in the life she built without you." My father stuttered, "I can explain," but I stepped forward. My voice no longer shook. "No, you can't. The night you cast us out, I lost my parents. I have a family now, but it isn't you." Silence stretched heavy and absolute. My mother's face crumbled, shame and disbelief warring in her eyes. My father's jaw clenched, but he said nothing more. They turned and walked out beneath the glass doors, their retreat a quiet collapse of whatever claim they thought they still had. I didn't move. My chest rose and fell with the weight of finality. For the first time, I felt the burden lift. They hadn't changed, but I had, and that was enough. Richard placed a hand on my shoulder, firm and steady. "You've faced them without fear," he said softly. "Now let the past stay where it belongs." I nodded, tears blurring the lobby lights into prisms. I wasn't the abandoned daughter anymore. I was the woman who had chosen to stand, and the mother who had kept her promise to her child. That evening, when Lily came home from school, she rushed into my arms, chattering about a gold star her teacher had given her. I held her tight, inhaling the sunshine scent of crayons and paper. "I'm so proud of you," I whispered, and the words meant more than any accolade my parents could have offered. Richard joined us for dinner, laughter spilling across the long table. For the first time, I knew with certainty this was family. Not those who abandoned, but those who stayed, who chose love over blood. Weeks turned into months, and Whitmore Properties thrived under new vision. Richard guided quietly from the sidelines, letting me lead, his pride evident in every glance. I launched initiatives to help single parents afford homes, standing before the board and saying no child should grow up under a bridge. They agreed, and programs took root. Each success was more than business. It was redemption woven into brick and mortar, a way to turn scars into shelter for others. At night, I'd take Lily onto the balcony. We'd look out over Tampa's twinkling skyline, her small hand clutching mine. "That's our world now," I'd whisper. She'd giggle, waving to the lights. "Hi, world," she'd say, her laughter spilling like music. In that sound, I heard a promise she would never know the hunger, the cold, the invisibility I once endured. And that knowledge steadied me more than any title. Years softened into something almost unrecognizable from the days when survival was my only measure of success. Whitmore Properties became not just a company, but a vessel for second chances. I insisted on programs that offered affordable housing for struggling parents, remembering the nights I had begged strangers for warmth. Each contract signed felt like I was rewriting a chapter of my own past, transforming pain into foundation for others. Reporters loved the story, from abandoned mother to CEO. But what mattered most to me was watching Lily flourish in a world I had once thought out of reach. She skipped home from school with bright eyes, reciting stories and songs, her laughter spilling down the marble halls of the estate like sunlight flooding through glass. Richard would lean on his cane, listening with misty pride, and I would catch his gaze across the table, both of us, knowing we had repaired something fractured across generations. Despite the comfort, I never let myself forget. Sometimes late at night, I would stand at the balcony and look past the glittering skyline into memory. The cold rain under that bridge, the echo of my mother's final good luck before she shut her door. Those memories did not fade. They sharpened me. They reminded me to stay kind when others faltered, to recognize desperation behind the eyes of strangers. I told Lily fragments of our story as she grew older, not to burden her, but to teach her. Once Mommy had nowhere to go, I would begin, and she would frown, trying to picture it. Then I told her about the kindness of strangers who had given us tarps and crackers, about the stormy night when a man in a black suit had appeared like an answer to a prayer. She would always end with the same words, her little voice steady. "I'm glad you never gave up, Mommy." Those words became my anchor, a simple truth against which I measured everything. By the time Lily was 10, Richard had grown frailer, though his mind remained sharp as glass. He often said I had given him back what he thought was lost forever, hope, legacy, family. Sitting beside him, I realized we had both been betrayed by the same man in different ways, me as a daughter, him as a father. Yet together, we had chosen not to let betrayal define us. Love, responsibility, and perseverance stitched our broken pieces into something stronger. That understanding guided me when challenges rose in business, when competitors doubted me, when old fears whispered I was still that girl with 2 bags and no home. I looked at Lily, at Richard, at the life we had built, and I knew I was no longer powerless. I was living proof that endings can become beginnings. Years later, Whitmore Properties hosted a charity gala. The ballroom shimmered with crystal light, music flowing like champagne. But my focus was on the stage where Lily stood beside me in her first formal dress, her eyes shining with pride. Richard was there too, seated in the front row, his hands clasped as if in prayer. I told the audience the truth, not the polished headline, but the raw story. I told them about the betrayal, the eviction, the nights under bridges. I told them about the grandfather who returned when the world had abandoned me, and the child who gave me the strength to keep going. "Life doesn't end when you fall," I said, my voice carrying across the hushed room. "It begins when you rise. Family is not always blood. Family is love, responsibility, and the people who choose to stand with you when the world turns away." Applause rose like thunder, but all I saw was Lily's smile. All I felt was Richard's proud nod. When the night ended, I stepped outside into the Florida air. Stars glittered above, just as they had on the darkest nights of my past. But this time, I wasn't trembling in the cold or clutching my child under a tarp. I was standing tall, a mother, a granddaughter, a leader. I knew with certainty that whatever storms came, Lily and I would never face them alone again. The weight of abandonment had been replaced with the strength of chosen family. And in that realization, I felt free at last. If this story touched, you don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so more people can hear it. And I'd love to know in the comments, what does family mean to you?